My husband and I and my adult daughter went out to dinner, and our waitress came to the table and she was clearly in a negative mood. We could have said, we want a different waitress. We could have done that. But my daughter looked at her and she said, "Are you having a bad day?" And she just melted. She didn't really talk about it, but she sort of said yes. And then all of a sudden she was available because somebody saw her, somebody cared.
That's Phyllis Leavitt, psychotherapist for over 3 decades and author of America in Therapy.
We don't know what people have suffered. We just judge them so much by their exterior, by their defenses, really.
Phyllis is here to share how true inner healing through therapy is about breaking cycles of dysfunction to create safety and reconnection.
So much of what hurts people is that they feel like they have to have this perfect exterior, and there's only a certain way to look in the world. And you can't show any flaws because it's a sign of weakness or it's a sign of failure, when we're all fallible.
I'm your host, Reverend Eugen Bond, producer of the Enough-ism podcast. For more about the show, visit IamEnough-ism.com. And stay tuned for part 2 of Phyllis's episode, where we'll be discussing how journaling improves mental health by giving you permission to tell your truth. To learn more about a new meditation style I've created combining live guided meditation with interactive journaling, check out Enough-ism's virtual meetup group called Live Your Best Freaking Life, Guided Meditation and Journaling. Now with 1,400 members from around the world, check out meetup.com/enoughism-podcast to see what it's all about. Thanks, and enjoy part 1.
My name is Phyllis Leavitt, and I've been a psychotherapist for over 34 years. One of the main elements of really good psychotherapy is that we kind of look back into our past and see what the conditioning elements of our life have been, what the role models of human relations were that we learned in our families, what the experiences were, for better or for worse, with other people within the family, at school, with friends, in the community, in our places of worship, whatever they might have been. We sort of look mostly, at least to begin with, the places where we were injured, the places that led to coping mechanisms that weren't functional, or beliefs about ourselves that weren't positive, and that inspired us to coping mechanisms that later we found didn't work, like hiding or isolation or aggression or being run by obsessive fears or addiction, workaholism, people pleasing. There's a long list of ways that people cope when they're hurt by others, or they don't get the things that they need met by others, that are what we sort of look at. So part of the healing process is going into our past and also uncovering our strengths and our gifts and the good influences. And the idea of good therapy is to rework the things that were negative or hurtful and emphasize and expand and grow the things that were positive and that were our gifts and strengths. And I see that as a positive way to apply that to our country. We are made up of millions of immigrants who fled persecution and poverty. Not everyone, but many. And many of the original settlers were released from prison to start a colony over here for England. And so we have a history of trauma that actually hasn't been dealt with, that hasn't been on a national level taken on as we could heal this. We could look at the elements of healing for individuals and families and apply them to our nation. And part of that is understanding the effects of unresolved trauma. And I think this is one of the things that we don't talk about at all, is the ways that we've traumatized others. None of us are blameless. Many of us have been severely victimized with no question. But most of us, out of our own wounding, have not been stellar in our own personal relations at every moment. And it's okay. These are normal outcomes from the things that we've suffered that aren't healed. And if we could make that acceptable, that we could look and take responsibility for ourselves, whether it's us, an individual or a community or a church or a school or a government, that we make it actually like applaudable, that we can say, we did that and it wasn't okay, and we're ready to take responsibility and make amends and do it differently. And we can all do that in our own lives. We don't have to be therapists.
2 things stood out to me among many ideas. So the first is you talked about how injury sparks the aftermath. And then you also mentioned this is okay and this is normal. Talk about that.
We have to understand that no one is born a murderer. No one is born a rapist. No one is born an embezzler or a child molester. We're not. Something happens to us that injures our sense of self and our sense of connection to other human beings, so that out of that wound, we do not feel the right limits and boundaries around our own power or the compassion for others that we wouldn't harm them. They're understandable responses to ill treatment or bad role models or some kind of trauma that happens to people. And so it sort of opens the playing field to have some kind of compassionate care for even the worst among us in terms of their perpetration. We don't know how to treat every level of dysfunction. We don't. And there are people that are just not safe to be in society. And that's okay. We can understand that. But there are many, many people in prison today who don't belong there and who are only acting out victims of their own abuse. And they deserve to be treated, and they deserve to be brought back into society with every means that we have to help heal them, restore them to their essential selves. And I think that's an obligation of society, just like we see that as therapists. When someone comes to us, I haven't worked with a criminal population myself, but I haven't probably worked with anybody who hasn't felt at some time that they hurt other people out of their own unconsciousness. What heals? Not shame and blame, not retribution. What heals is deep compassion and a commitment to find the person underneath whatever they did that was less than stellar.
Yeah, how do we tap into that and find that person who's kind of hiding underneath, who deserves that compassion?
The starting place is developing that in ourselves, because when you know that in yourself, that there's an essential person in you underneath, that was part of my own healing, was being able to go through the layers of pain that were in my life and the layers of the defenses that I had that were not helpful to me, and find that, I would say, essential self that I think we all have. And when you've contacted that, it's possible. And then when you look at another person that it's in there too. And we can speak to that, whether it's actually in our words or in our vibration or the way we look at them or our tone of voice or how we respond to what they say. And I think we all know, whether we verbalize this or not, when that's coming toward us and when it's not. We know when someone is just looking at us with judgment or indifference or shame or, whatever it is, that's not like, I see you. I really see that there's someone inside of you worthwhile. That's one way. And then definitely techniques that we use in therapy that really help people access their inner child, the part that was there before anything happened to them. We're not all going to go out into the world and be therapists, but we can all ask deeper questions. I've told the story a couple of times, and it was just such a simple thing. And so, so out of the range for some of us most of the time. So my husband and I and my adult daughter went out to dinner, and our waitress came to the table, and she was clearly in a negative mood. And she was very short and very unfriendly. And, and we could have said, we want a different waitress. We could have done that. But my daughter looked at her and she said, "Are you having a bad day?" And she just melted. She didn't really talk about it, but she sort of said yes. And then all of a sudden she was available because somebody saw her, somebody cared. Sometimes it's just that little of a thing that we can give one another, that I see you. I see you're not your bad mood.
I see you. I hear you.
Yeah.
It looks like you're not doing okay, and I understand. And let me help you out.
Yeah. It's another beautiful story that I read of a woman who had decided to travel across the country and just interview random people and get their stories. She just wanted to make a collection of random, unknown Americans. And she was terrified to do it. So she went into a cafe or a diner or something, and she had told herself, the first person that makes eye contact with me, I'm going to go over, tell them what I'm doing, and ask them if they'd tell me their story. So this man in the back of the diner had looked up at her, and she walked over and she sat down, and she told him what she was doing, and she asked him to tell his story, and he did. And at the end, he said to her, "No one in my whole life has ever asked me." And what a gift. What a gift. We don't know what people have suffered. We just judge them so much by their exterior, by their defenses, really.
Everybody has something that they need to share, and
Yeah.
it might be so different than the story you think you have about them by observing them.
And it usually is. And again, there's lots of psychotherapeutic techniques that help get to what's underneath. But part of it is just espousing that we can own our stuff. I can tell my story. I don't have to be ashamed to say, I didn't have the best childhood. I made mistakes as a mother, that I wish I could go back and correct. I said something yesterday to my husband in a short tone of voice that I'm not proud of, that we can make it okay to be fallible, because so much of what hurts people is that they feel like they have to have this perfect exterior, and there's only a certain way to look in the world. And you can't show any flaws because it's a sign of weakness or it's a sign of failure, when we're all fallible. And that's our human condition. And it's to embrace, give permission to each other to just be human.
It sounds like what you're saying is to be soft with yourself, be kind to yourself, be
Yeah.
joyous, be light,
Yeah.
and don't be so wrapped up in your own little stormy vortex. Like, what is that character from Charlie Brown? Is it Linux, who's always walking around with the rain above his head?
Right.
Like,
Right.
let's enlighten. It's okay. And of
Yeah.
course, it depends where you are and what you're going through, but it's okay. And we're all going through this together. We all have our stuff.
We all do. I really try to imagine what our country could transform into if we could bring some of this to the highest level of political discourse. Because when we're wrapped up in our own identity and our own needs and our own defenses, and a lot of it is defenses against being overpowered or looking bad or feeling stupid or not being attractive or whatever it is, we tend to hold on really tightly to our own point of view and not let in another person's point of view, because it feels like an assault on our identity or our safety or whatever. And I try to imagine if we could bring some of these principles to the opposition and the divisiveness in our country and really institute that as a way that we be as a governing body, and role model that for all of our country and all of our young people, that people who have really different opinions, believe they have really different needs, which I'm not sure we all really do in the end, could actually sit down with that kind of softness and openness that you're talking about and listen to one another. Because one of the things that I've found in my own life, and certainly as a therapist, working with so many different populations, couples and families and children and individual adults, is that we all really want to be heard. We all really want to be respected. And we all really want to connect with other people in a safe, loving, and valuing kind of way. But we haven't learned how to give that to one another. So we demand it for ourselves, but we don't necessarily give it to other people. And that's one of the big learnings of psychotherapy. And it's not a judgment to say that. I think we're conditioned that way. I certainly didn't grow up in a family that ever talked about anything. What my parents thought was the way it was. Nobody actually knew to even ask what the kids in the family felt or wanted. We were supposed to want what they wanted. This is a new learning, I think, societally, that we all want to be heard. And we actually need to learn the skills of that kind of deep, compassionate listening, because out of that, and this is what we see in therapy that's successful, and I want to say, no one is perfect. Nobody does it perfectly. We don't. We're human. But out of the therapy that's successful, people do really feel heard. And out of that, it's much easier to come back together and reconnect. And sometimes the whole fight about whatever it was about just disappears, because it wasn't about that. It was about not feeling loved and heard and respected.
Do you believe that that's where a lot of people's mental health issues and emotional issues stem from? Is I want to feel heard.
I want to feel heard. I would say it this way. I want to feel heard. I want to feel loved, and I want to feel valued. And because all of that is like a healthy bonding and reconnection with other people. What brings people the most pain and the resulting worst dysfunction is a lack of love and belonging, a lack of feeling like they're a part of and valued in connection with other people.
A key question I have for you is, if you don't have access, or you feel like you don't have access to a therapist or someone to talk to, what do you do? If your circle is small, you feel isolated, how do you foster that sense of community?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's an easy answer. I think we are a very uncommunity oriented society in general. Some people are very fortunate to have community or to have the wherewithal to create community, but many people are very, very isolated, even if they don't look that way on the outside. But I want to say a couple of things. One of the things that I did when I was young, and it was before I ever, knew about therapy or going to a therapist or anything, was I read books. And I read book after book after book, mostly autobiographies and biographies of people who had overcome great odds. And it inspired me and it spoke to me and it made me feel like there was hope. It's reading books, it's listening to uplifting podcasts, hearing so many podcasters today want to know people's stories, how they got from where they were to where they are now, what were the things that helped. Certainly, there is a need for human connection of another kind. It's not all going to come through media or books. We need to be healed with other people because the injuries are from other people and they are to our human connection. And ultimately, we need to find that connection with other people. But along the way, do what you love. If nature calls to you, go to nature. Nature can be unbelievably healing. Animals can be healing. Art can be healing. Creativity can be healing. Music can be healing. It's that will to just keep going and find the next thing that opens your heart or has you feel connected to yourself. And look for other people, look for groups. Call a hotline if you have to. Find a human voice. There's so many things, but ultimately, and this is the second thing I want to say about this, I want to see that commitment to helping heal one another and stop the cycle of abuse that's so rampant in our country, that's creating so many victims and survivors who are not functioning well in their own lives. I want our commitment to be to our mental health. I want our resources to go to helping families, to having more programs for children, to offering more therapy, to helping people have better housing and medical care and education, because these are all the things that help produce mentally well human beings. When people live in a world where they see someone has $1 million yacht or $175 million yacht and they don't have enough food on their table, it's abuse. It's passive abuse to live in a world of plenty and be neglected and be deprived. And if you're of a minority population, to be looked down on and considered to be of blame for your own circumstances. That's a form of severe emotional abuse. And we have many people suffering from that today. Many people. If a family was feeding one child and starving another child, they'd be put in jail. The parents would be put in jail. But as a country, we allow these things to be done. We would consider criminal if they were done to us. And that's a sign of failing mental health.
Yeah.
How many times in your own life would you say that somebody offering you a bigger picture really helped you pull you out of a stuck place? We need a bigger picture because sometimes the stuck places like these four walls around us that are just so tight we can't see beyond them.
Phyllis, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your perspectives. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight talking with you. It's always wonderful to speak with like-minded people and, people who are sort of after the same thing and the same kinds of healing for individuals and for the collective. I just very, very, very much appreciate you. Thank you.
Congratulations, you've reached the end of the Enough-ism podcast. Show some love if you'd like by subscribing and leaving a review. If you wish to support the show, you can download the Enough-ism ebook, now available on Amazon, by visiting IamEnough-ism.com. Make a Venmo donation if you'd like at Enough-ism. Questions or comments? Want to be a guest on the show? Drop me a note at enoughisompodcast@gmail.com. I'm Reverend Eugen Bond. Remember, we are all enough just the way we are. See you next time.